Hi, morning, Westside. Well, I really do hope that you're getting excited about these Get Better groups. If you've ever done Rooted, you know how when you do the things that Rooted challenges you to do, you just can't help but be changed at the end of that 10 weeks. I'm pretty confident that's how it's going to be for these Get Better groups. I think that's how they're going to go for people. Like when you do the group discussions, when you do the corresponding practices that go with each week, I think you're going to finish the 6 weeks a different person than when you started. And so we're excited about it. And hey, if you're a little paralyzed by your options about whom to group with, man, don't get stuck there. I'd recommend you pull the trigger now, aim later, trust the 6-week group experience to do its thing, lean into the practices, and let God take care of the rest. So, hey, I am really digging this series that we're in. It's a short series, but this central metaphor of a pendulum swinging back and forth between two extremes. I'm loving it because, we're just really only handling, 3 in this series, but there are so many aspects of the Christian life that feel like we're trying to hold these two different things in tension. And, we're trying to find the sweet spot in between these two good things, that if you take these good things too far, if you take them to the extreme, then they become bad things. And there's just so many things like that. The one that we're looking at today is that tension between caring what people think about you and not caring what people think about you. How much do you care about what people think about you? Maybe a little would you rather would help you answer that question, figure out where you're at in that. Would you rather be a liar, but believed by everyone in the world to be incredibly honest? Or would you rather be truly honest, never said anything in your life that was untrue, perfectly honest in every way, but believed by the world to be a lying scumbag that no one can trust? Would you rather be prideful, but believed by the world to be incredibly humble, or truly humble, completely self-forgetful, but believed by the world to be arrogant? Would you rather be self-absorbed, but believed to be compassionate, or truly compassionate, but believed by the world to be all about yourself? Would you rather be a fool, whom everyone believes to be wise, or truly wise, aligned with the deepest rhythms of this universe, but in the eyes of the world, believed to be a fool? Your image, your reputation, how you are seen and known by people in this world, how important is that to you? What's your reputation worth to you? And would you sell your soul to preserve it? Maybe just a little portion of your soul, maybe? What's it worth to you? It's really not hard to find, really all over the Bible, scriptures that value reputation, scriptures that are encouraging us to care about how we are perceived. It's a fact. Appearances matter. And we actually have a moral obligation to care what people think about us. Proverbs, right out of the gate, in chapter 22, the first verse of that chapter, says, "Choose a good reputation over great riches. Being held in high esteem is better than silver or gold." If you have to choose someday between being rich or having a good name, the Bible says go for the good name every time. Right? Having a good reputation is incredibly valuable. It'd be foolish. It is foolish not to value it. The first Christians certainly cared very much about how they were seen in this world. They obviously valued having a positive reputation here. Listen to what Paul writes to a church leader named Titus. He's saying, Titus, teach your people how to live in this world that is watching you. He says, teach older men to be self-controlled, worthy of respect, wise, strong in faith, love, and patience. Likewise, teach older women to live in a way that honors God, not speaking against others or enslaved to wine, but teaching what is good. Then they can train the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be wise and pure, to be good workers at home, to be kind, to yield to their husbands, And then listen to this. He says, then no one will be able to criticize the teaching that God gave us. In the same way, encourage young men to be wise. He's saying the world is watching, Titus. The world is already pretty skeptical of us. They're eager to pounce, eager to criticize this whole Christian thing. They think we're a weird cult that's making people dumber, that's messing up the whole order and fabric of the Greco-Roman society. Your congregation, Titus, needs to show them otherwise. From the older to the younger, you get your people to live such honorable lives that no one has any room to criticize our source. He says, in every way, be an example, because people are watching, so be an example of doing good deeds. When you teach, do it with honesty and seriousness. Speak the truth so that you cannot be criticized. Then those who are against us will be ashamed because there is nothing bad to say about us. And then he says, slaves or servants should be subject to their masters at all times, trying to please them, not arguing with them. They shouldn't steal from them, but should show their masters they can be fully trusted, so that in everything they do, they will make the teaching of God our Savior attractive. See, that's what Christian character does. That's what obeying Jesus does. It makes his teachings attractive in this world. Just as jewels make a crown look good, the way you live out Jesus' teachings makes his ways look appealing in this world. So of course, God intends for his people to be self-aware, aware of how they might look to a watching world, caring deeply about how they're perceived in this world, because he intends for his ways to be displayed to this world through your life. So many people out there lost, searching for a truth solid enough for them to build their lives on, groping in the dark, trying to figure out the best way to live this life forward. What do you think? God is up there waiting for the prime opportunity to drop a Bible in their laps? Or maybe put a miracle, walk a miracle through their line of sight? Maybe. Probably not. No, his preference is for them to see you living out his ways in your life. He's waiting for the prime opportunity for your life to walk through their line of sight, his ways, his wisdom, his word, deeply manifested in your life. That's what he wants them to see. So yeah, the look of your life absolutely matters, because those outside the church are watching. And it's not just those outside the believing community. See, in a different letter, Paul is writing to Christians in Corinth, and he's specifically addressing the portion of this community who's seeing themselves as the more knowledgeable about the Christian life, maybe the more mature, they think. These more informed Christians quite rightly understood that food that had been presented as an offering to another god or goddess in a temple is still just food. It's just food. The food hasn't actually been changed or corrupted or made unholy by becoming an offering to this god, since that god or goddess doesn't actually exist. So, this more informed group, they were correct, but they were clueless about how the way in which their more informed behavior was affecting those in the community who were less informed, those who were weaker in their faith. And so he says this. He says, suppose one of you who has knowledge, one of you informed folk, eats in an idol's temple. Someone who is weak in faith might see you eating there and be encouraged to eat meat sacrificed to idols before they've really matured to that point, while they're still thinking that it's wrong to do it, right? So they end up violating their conscience, they end up sinning because of your more informed behavior, your more informed example. And then he goes on to say, this weak believer for whom Christ died is ruined because of your knowledge. He's like, man, if you've got the more complete, the more mature faith, act like it. Be considerate of other believers who maybe aren't as far along as you and who are influenced by your behavior. If you are so knowledgeable, quit being clueless. Know that the look of your life matters because those inside the church are watching. Those who are less mature than you are watching you live, and they're taking their cues from you. Early in my time on staff here, I remember getting to know a handful of the young adults, and I was talking with one of the young adult leaders, and I was asking her about her plans for the weekend, and she told me that she and her boyfriend were headed out of state on a weekend trip. And as soon as she told me that, she was very quick to mention that they would be staying with his family in separate rooms. Now, was she concerned about what I thought of her? Perhaps. But as soon as she said it, I remember immediately getting the sense that, you know what, I don't think she's just saying that for my sake. I think this sounds to me like she's been saying this, she's been including those little clarifying details every time she's explained this to people. Now, why would she do that? Well, because she understood that to lead is to influence. To live this Christian life is to influence. She was keenly aware that others are watching and following, keenly aware that with every word she speaks and posts, with every attitude she displays, with every decision she makes, she is either raising or lowering the bar of what's normal, acceptable, and expected. So yeah, you might be a person who would do well to care a little more about what people think. Whether you're a leader or not, people are watching you. No matter how private you think your life is, people see you. And how you live your life raises or lowers the bar for others. Of course, maybe you're already very aware that people are watching. You might even think of yourself as too aware. You care too much about what people think about you. Maybe you feel like image maintenance is all you do. That's your full-time job. You are so habitually mindful of how others are seeing you, so habitually in tune with what others are wanting from you, that you actually sometimes forget what you yourself want. You live so much of your life on a stage before others, you actually forget who you are when you're not performing for someone else. And maybe because of your social skills, you're pretty savvy. Maybe people are surprised when you tell them that you're an introvert, but it's the truth. You come home exhausted from the burden of having to be on for people. Or maybe you've always said you're an introvert, but in reality, you're actually probably just an insecure extrovert who's always exhausted by social settings because of that constant burdensome fear that you're constantly carrying when people are around. You're constantly asking the question, what do people think of me? And it's exhausting. A good reputation, it's a good thing. People thinking well of you, it's a great thing. But whenever you take a good thing too far, whenever you make a good thing into a god, it becomes a bad thing. It becomes an idol in your life. And as idols do, it is guaranteed to enslave you. Now, I know that enslavement quite well. And so in my immature, kind of adolescent rebellion against it, you know what I'm tempted to do? I'm tempted to swing that pendulum to the other extreme and think things like, I don't care what you think. I don't care what people think of me. Who cares what people think of me? I sure don't, right? And honestly, it's not hard to find that attitude in the Bible. Well, what appears to be, what might appear to some to be that attitude in the Bible. At several points, Scripture seems to devalue the opinions of people, encouraging a refreshingly carefree attitude toward how we're perceived. One example is Paul, again, writing to those Christians in Corinth. Specifically, this time, he's writing to the ones who were talking bad about him. Listen to what he says. He says, "As for me, it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you or by any human authority. Shoot, I don't even trust my own judgment on this point." He's like, I know how self-deceived I can be. I'm skeptical of even my own self-evaluation. He says, "My conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove that I'm right. It is the Lord himself who will examine me and decide. Ultimately, God is my judge." I can just kind of hear Paul saying this to his scribe. He's like, "Here, write this. I don't give a rip about what you think of me." No, strike that. No, that's not true. Here, say this instead. "I care very little about what you think of me compared to what God thinks of me." Yeah, that's better. And just a few lines later, Paul is painting a picture of how unpopular Christians are, how ridiculous they must look to the watching world. Listen to this. He says, "We are hungry and thirsty. We are naked and beaten and homeless. And we grow weary from the work of our hands. When we're cursed, we bless. When persecuted, we endure. When slandered, we speak kindly. Yet we are treated like the rubbish of the world, like everyone's trash." Paul, they're hating you, man. Does that not bother you? Yeah, not really. That almost seems to fuel Paul. Now, you might hear that and think, wait a second, is this the same Paul? Is this the same guy who was just writing to Titus a minute ago? The guy who seemed to care very much that this Christian life is perceived in a positive way. I mean, it almost sounds as if he's completely swung to the other side of all of this. Like, isn't Paul bothered by this in the least? Bothered by this fact that these Christians have become a kind of spectacle of foolishness in the eyes of the world? I mean, it sounds like he doesn't care. And it's like, honestly, so many verses in this New Testament that make it sound like being ridiculed and persecuted by the world isn't just expected, but it's actually an honorable burden for us to carry. Well, you know where it comes from. It's coming from the source. It's coming from the one who had the reputation of a crucified king. Listen to what Jesus says. He says, "Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of me, the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that is how their ancestors treated the prophets of old, the righteous sent by God." And then he gives the corresponding flip side of the coin, the woe. Not blessed are you, but rather woe to you when everyone speaks well of you. When you've got an awesome reputation with everyone. For that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. What? So which is it? Come on. Are we supposed to care or not care what people think of us? Well, so often in these pendulum situations, it seems like the balanced approach is the right way forward. Staying in between the two extremes, in between too much on this side, too much on that side, as if it's the too muchness that's the problem. And therefore, moderation, all things in moderation, is the way of living in the sweet spot, right? And honestly, that's probably not a bad way to think sometimes. That might even be helpful sometimes. But is it Christian? Is that the Jesus way of thinking? So often in the Gospels, you find someone throwing some polarizing issue at Jesus, trying to get him to pick a side, right? And you never find him picking a side. You really don't find him taking the moderate approach. Instead, what Jesus seems to do is he seems to prefer to establish higher ground above the whole issue, above both sides. And only by getting above establishing a kind of transcendent position over the two extremes. Can one be not moderate, but rather radical about both sides of the issue? To fully embrace the good in the two extremes of an issue. Two directions that might honestly seem opposed to each other. That might just be more like the Jesus way than the all things in moderation approach. What might that higher transcendent position be above caring and not caring what people think about us? Where is this higher ground? What's it look like? What's it sound like? Well, you know that John the Baptist had a tough job. His ego had a tough job. He was kind of like the last of the Old Testament prophets, the last song of the show, right? The encore performance, the song that everybody came out to hear. And then all of a sudden, he's the opening act. The band that's just brought up to warm up the crowd for the band that everyone actually came out to hear. Can you imagine having your fame and renown drop from the tip top to the bottom overnight, and you enjoy it? How could a person's ego find joy in that? Well, in chapter 3 of the Gospel of John, that's a different John, by the way, John the Baptist's disciples, his students, they're coming to him surprised and concerned. See, up to this point, John was the man. Throngs of people went out into the middle of nowhere to see John in action, to hear him speak, to watch him baptize people. Mark says, one of the other Gospels, all of Judea, including all of Jerusalem, went out to hear him and watch him. And, I'm sure John was quite a spectacle. He would stomp on everyone's toes, remind everyone, including the religious leaders, how sinful everybody is. And he would call everyone to repent. That means to apologize for their sin and change their ways. And then he would dunk them in water, symbolizing the death of the old self, right? And people loved it. Well, most people. There were some. Eventually grew a little tired of John's antics, and they started debating John and his disciples. And it was right around that time that John's crowds started thinning out a little bit, getting a little thinner than they used to be. And rumor had it that Jesus and his disciples were stealing John's thunder just down the road. Well, John's crowds were shifting over to Jesus. And John's disciples were surprised and concerned. And so they come to John and they said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan River, the one you testified about, look, he's baptizing and everyone is going to him. Isn't that a problem? You're losing it, John. You bothered by that? John says this. A person can receive only what is given them from heaven, which is an incredible insight here. We're going to unpack that here in a second. He says to his disciples, guys, you know how plainly I've told you, I am not the Messiah. I've been saying this. I am not the Messiah. I'm only here to prepare the way for him. This whole time I've been saying, I'm not the one, but my job, my purpose is to get everybody's ears and hearts ready to encounter the one. And then he says this. He says, he, that one, Jesus, he must become greater, and I must become less. His reputation, his name, his image must increase, and mine must decrease. Now, don't mistake John for someone who doesn't care what people think of him, as if he doesn't value his reputation. No. These are the words of someone who actually understands the whole purpose of his reputation, who understands that his reputation is something to be stewarded for the sake of someone else. These are the words of someone who thoroughly understands that although John is responsible for his reputation, his name, his brand, his image, it doesn't ultimately belong to him. It ultimately belongs to God, which is where we come in. Your reputation, our reputations, ultimately belong to God, who has a purpose for them. John's knee-jerk response is just so rich. He says a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. John, don't you care that you're losing your crowd, your renown, your influence in this world? You're losing it, man. And John says, no. I'm not losing anything that was actually mine to keep in the first place, because a person can receive. A person can really only keep. They can only hang on to what God gave to them to keep. John's fundamental belief was that his reputation, goodness, his whole ministry, his whole sphere of influence, all of his resources, both material and social, all of it belongs to God. God is the one who provides it, and he provides it with a purpose. Taking a great line from an old Andy Stanley message on this story. It says, when it comes to your reputation, your image, your knownness, you need to understand who it's from and who it's for. Who it comes from God. And understanding that your reputation is something God provides, that is such a helpful starting point. Because that takes so much pressure off you, doesn't it? You are not responsible for creating a name for yourself. You can quit trying to manufacture that. You are responsible for your character. You let God provide the rest. You are not responsible for how others feel about you. So you can quit trying to manage other people's opinions of you. You are responsible for how you live your life in front of a world that's watching. So you need to concentrate on living wisely, living obediently to God, being faithful in what he has already given to you, and you leave the rest to him. Understand who it's from and who's it for? It's for God. It is for his purposes. Whatever reputation or sphere of influence he's provided to you, yes, it is something for you to manage, but it's not for you. It's not for you to use to advance your brand. It's not for the purpose of making your life cush and easy. And honestly, when you think like that, you're done. Because for one thing, you could lose it all overnight, just like that. Man, and what would be worse is you might actually succeed. John so beautifully understood that his reputation and fame was all for the purpose of serving Jesus' reputation and fame. And yours is as well. Whatever name you've been given, it's for making his name known. Whatever reputation you have, it's for serving Jesus' reputation. Whatever image you have in this world, your image is intended to reflect and magnify his image in this world. And when you're living your life for his sake, for his purposes, when you're laying your image down on the altar as an offering to your Creator and Redeemer, that puts you on a higher plane from which you can see and embrace the whole spectrum between caring deeply about how people see you and caring less about how people see you. Because it's from that plane that it becomes clear. It was never actually about us in the first place. In the end, it's not really about caring or not caring what people think about us. It's always been about what people care, what people think about him, caring what this world thinks of him. So may what people think about us, may our reputations, whether they be positive or negative, honored or ridiculed, wise or foolish. May our reputations ultimately be useful to God and whatever it is he wishes to do through our lives.